It was April 1st, 1983, and I found myself sitting in the front row of the balcony of this old theater that had been converted into a church. And it was there that I saw the strangest and yet most compelling story I had ever imagined. It was also the first time I had ever been in a church building. You see, when I was growing up, my family had its own set of Sunday morning rituals. My dad played golf, and my sister and I watched TV while eating my mom's French toast triangles. Decades before French toast sticks became the heart-stopping favorite on the Burger King menu, my mom had perfected the technique of frying batter-dipped Wonder Bread in the Fry Daddy. Well, in the winter, my sister and I had to eat quickly so we could make it to our bowling league on time. And this combination of TV, bowling, and deep-fried bread made Sunday mornings the second best day of the week. Second, because nothing could outdo Saturday mornings with their promise of AWA professional wrestling. You see, most kids in Minnesota, they knew about professional wrestling on TV, but for the blessed few of us who lived in Golden Valley, just 2 miles from the Channel 9 studios, Saturday mornings meant hopping on our Huffy Thunder Road so that we could go and see Vern Gagne, Hulk Hogan, the Crusher, and the High Flyers in action and within spitting distance. Well, between the ringside seats and my mom's French toast triangles, my weekends were plenty full without ever going to church. And I had no idea that other people spent their weekend mornings dressed in their best clothes, sitting still, and eating tiny pieces of unleavened bread. And it wasn't just that I chose not to go to church. I came from a family of intentional non-church goers. There was a church on every corner that we didn't go to on purpose. Well, even though I had no Christian framework, I did have thoughts about and even faith in God. Now, I'm not sure where this awareness of God came from, but it ran deep. I didn't know the story of God, and yet I had a gut-level understanding that God was active and involved in the world and wanted people to join in that activity. Well, I remember watching the movie Billy Jack as a 12-year-old and thinking, now that's probably what God is into. Before I had any usable vision of Jesus, it was Billy Jack that I saw as God's co-worker. He was a half Native American, half Caucasian Vietnam vet with a black belt in karate, riding on a motorcycle, living in the desert, and coming with fist and feet to the aid of the native people who were being oppressed by the man. Defending the powerless and looking wicked cool doing it, that was a picture of God's agenda that grabbed me. I wanted to be a part of that agenda. I wanted to be the one bringing justice and righting wrongs and protecting the weak. Well, the Billy Jack image of God hung in there and gave me a tangible picture of a possible life with God. But it really wasn't enough. I knew that something wasn't quite right. There was this disconnect between who I was and who I wanted to be. But I couldn't figure out what it was or what to do about it. And I sometimes wondered if it wouldn't have been better to not think about God at all than to know of God and feel so out of sync with God. I was lost. There was something out there, something I knew I wanted to find, but I couldn't name it, let alone make my way toward it. Well, Steve and I, we were best friends growing up, and he was equally unversed in all things Christian. We lived in the Village Terrace apartments, and we shared the kind of unsupervised, we-run-the-show childhood that seems to be the birthright of us apartment complex kids. But Steve, he had a really hard go of it. His mom left his family when he was 5, and his dad was hooked into all sorts of addictions. And when he was 13, Steve was forcibly removed from his dad's care and placed in a foster home. So 2 years later, when Steve moved back in with his dad, it was clear to all of us at the village that he had been born again. For now, Steve started carrying with him a big Bible everywhere that he went, and he was now talking constantly about Jesus. And all of Steve's new Jesus talk didn't make any sense to me. My understanding of Jesus pretty much started and stopped with John Lennon singing, "Christ, you know it ain't easy. The way things are going, they're going to crucify me." Or this little ditty that my mom would sing. that went, "Drop kick me Jesus through the goalposts of life, end over end, neither to the left nor the right." But even I could tell that Steve, who had been the craziest kid I had ever known, had changed. Instead of being up for whatever destructive plan the rest of us apartment complex kids came up with, Steve was the guy hanging out his second floor window, yelling at all the rest of us to stop all the sinning. So when Steve asked me if I wanted to go with him to something called the Passion Play, well, I thought the old Steve had returned. I mean, when a 16-year-old guy hears that there's a play about passion going on downtown, well, let's just say I wasn't expecting it to be about Jesus. But I agreed to go, and on Friday night, April 1st, 1983, we hopped in my car and headed downtown. That's how I ended up settling into the front row of the balcony of this old theater that had been converted into a church. Well, the place had a strange smell to it. It smelled like old paper and old clothes and old people. The worn velvet seat creaked as I peered over the balcony railing to the stage below, and as people filled in the rows of seats on the main floor, I could sense the excitement building in the theater. It all felt so foreign to me. I had no idea what it was all about, and yet I couldn't wait to see what might happen. Well, the lights went down, and the play started. As I watched the scenes from Jesus' life, I had this kind of deja vu moment. I knew this story. The events themselves, they were all brand new to me. I'd never heard of a one of them. But they did carry a strange familiarity with them, like the kindness of Jesus and the loneliness of seeming abandonment and God standing with the weak. Like everyone else, I knew pain. I had been both the violated, lonely victim and the oppressing, bullying offender. But in the Jesus story, I saw God as the source of redemption for both the victim and the victimizer. God was about wholeness and healing and renewal for the petty tax collector and for the spent prostitute and for the lonely teenager. I watched Jesus now as the one taking on the corrupt leaders. I saw him defending the poor and the broken. I saw him speak for those who had no voice. It was Jesus, the Son of God, who was healing and standing up for forgotten people. I was on board with this guy long before he hit the cross. And then they got to the resurrection. Now, there was a twist I never saw coming. I had no idea that something could trump the unbelievable and startling "Father, forgive them" line that Jesus screamed from the cross. But then Jesus came back, and something inside me burst open with hope. This is what I had longed for. This is what I had needed to be true. There was a God alongside the tortured and beaten Jesus. There was God on the side of people, bringing about goodness in the midst of horror, betrayal, and struggle. There was God inviting people to join in the redemption of it all. There was God outdoing my vigilante Billy Jack faith with something far better. And sitting in my creaky seat, leaning over the railing, I felt my soul wake up. This was the story that was deeply planted in me. This was the completion of the story of God that had been in me from childhood. And it was a bright, clear marker that I knew would set me on the path toward something.